So when becoming a UK tax non-resident, one of the main things that comes up is the statutory residency test, because that's the main test that HMRC looks at when assigning if you have become a non-resident or not. And in this video, we will cover what it is and how does it works. I'm joined by Laura Seth, who's a partner at LSR Partners based in the UK, and she's going to share the details of the statutory residency test with us. Laura, thank you for joining us today.
No worries, Shiraz. Thanks for having me. The statutory residence test came into play in April 2013, and it was introduced by HMRC in order to provide, say, a clear way, but a black and white way of figuring out whether somebody is considered to be UK tax resident or non-resident. Whilst it's called the statutory residence test, it's in fact a series of tests that are used to make this determination. The way that UK tax residence works, you can in principle be UK tax resident in 1 year, but UK tax non-resident in another year. So yes, there are various ways that you can be considered automatically non-resident in the UK if you've spent depending on your circumstances, no more than 15 or 45 midnights in the UK, or if you're meeting the criteria of full-time work outside of the UK. There are ways you can be considered automatically resident in the UK by spending 183 or more midnights in the UK during a particular tax year, meeting the criteria of having your only home in the UK or full-time work inside of the UK, say, of course, but the tests for being automatically resident, or those last two tests for being automatically resident, are a little easier to achieve than some of the being non-resident. And then if you're neither automatically non-resident or resident in the UK, there's kind of a tiebreaker question, but like something called the sufficient ties test, where dependent upon the number of ties you have to the UK, coupled with the number of midnights you spend in the UK or the number of days you spend in the UK, it will determine whether you're UK tax resident or non-resident.
Okay, and is there any other additional test that is associated with the statutory residency test?
So those are all the kind of the main tests. There are a set of tests that are available in the year that you pass. If you die during the year, then there are some specific tests relative to that. There's also something called split year treatment that can be considered if you are relocating into or out of the UK during a particular tax year. So the starting point might be that you're a UK tax resident, but if you meet certain criteria for leaving or arriving into the UK, it might be possible to split the tax year so that whilst as a starting point UK tax resident, you may be able to have a period where you're considered to be non-resident during the year.
Sure. So if someone was looking to become a non-resident, this year or next year, and want to navigate the statutory residency test and other things associated with that, right? So what is let's say, a checklist of action points that one should do and follow in order to successfully be a non-tax resident?
I think if you were looking at breaking UK tax residence, you need to make sure that you're comfortable with the statutory residence test. As I mentioned, it's a series of tests, and if you can imagine it, it is like a flow chart. So you have to kind of answer the questions in the relevant order, and that will either determine whether you're non-resident, resident, or, as I say, you end up down at the sufficient ties test. So I think it's one of those where if there's a lot of people that I talk to who maybe kind of come out with well, by the sufficient ties test, I can be non-resident if I meet these criteria. And you go, okay, yeah, that's fine. But have you actually looked above it? Because the way that it works in terms of it being a flowchart, you might not actually get down to the sufficient ties test. You may find that you're non-resident or resident before you even get there. I think if you are looking at leaving the UK, I've noticed the past 12, 18 months, there are a lot of people who are leaving for the purposes of tax mitigation. Probably there would have been people relocating prior to that before for the purposes of tax mitigation, but it certainly seems to be more of a main consideration for people, whereas previously it was more about personal choices in terms of maybe leaving to go to somewhere that they wanted to, partner had moved for work purposes or something like that. Anyway, if you are looking at going for for tax purposes, or as I'm sure you've seen, there's a lot of people moving to Dubai at this period in time, and for people who are looking at moving to Dubai, that may or may not be for tax purposes, but obviously there is a benefit or a tax benefit in terms of relocating to Dubai. So quite often when you're going in that sort of direction, and there's a tax reason to do so, you need to make sure that you're comfortable with the statutory residence test, and you need to understand what limitations there are on you if you are looking to break UK tax residence.
Yeah, so thank you, Laura, for that. And my next question would be, what are the filing requirements in the year that someone is looking to become or break the UK tax residency, and then the years following that, the next year or the years after, what filing requirements are you looking at?
So I think to an extent, it like in terms of telling HMRC that you're leaving the UK, that is going to depend as to whether you are um, within the self-assessment tax return system or whether you're not. Um, some people we work with have their own company, or they're self-employed, or they have significant amounts of investment income and they need to file tax returns. For people like that, um, when they leave the UK, they would have to notify HMRC in the year of departure that they are leaving the UK, assuming that there is split year treatment available to them. They would need to notify HMRC in the tax return. And there are residency specific pages in the tax return. So it's something that's worth being aware if, say, for example, you do your own tax return, and you do it through the government gateway account, you won't be able to make that notification to HMRC through the government gateway account. You would either need to use some a paper tax return, or you'd need to get HMRC approved tax return software, or you need to use an agent, like an accountant, to get it filed. Um, Equally, we have people who are employed, and maybe that's all I say all they are, but like historically, if your income levels were over £100,000, you had to file tax returns. HMRC have now removed that requirement. There's no kind of income level at which you need to be filing tax returns. And on the face of it, if employment income is your sole source of income, HMRC will reconcile your position independently to your tax returns. So, if that's the case, then you can notify HMRC that you're leaving the UK by means of filing a P85, which can be done through your government gateway account. You can, alternatively, if you haven't got one set up, you can effectively prepare it online, print it, and then pop it in the post to HMRC to let them know. And the reason that you might want to do that, if you are simply employed, but if there's no reason for you to file your UK tax to file a UK tax return, if, say, for example, you're employed, the way that a UK payroll works is that for every month you receive 1/12 of any personal allowance, 20% tax bracket, 40% tax bracket. So if, for example, you were to leave the UK after 6 months into the year, then you're going to have lost, you'll only have been given through your payroll, half, 50% of any personal allowance, 20% tax bracket, 40% tax bracket. And on the face of it, your income levels will be lower. So you will likely have overpaid taxes. Hence, there is some benefit to letting them know that you've left the UK. It can also cause issues later on down the line if you don't tell HMRC that you're leaving the UK.
Yeah, and that's a good point to touch upon, that what happens if someone leaves the UK without properly notifying and assuming that I satisfy all the sufficient ties tests, so I'm no longer
Yeah.
a resident, So what are the consequences of that?
So it's one of those where if you do a bit of research, it does say if you are leaving the UK, you need to tell HMRC that you are doing that. The reality is, if there's no reason for you to be issued with a refund, generally HMRC will write to you and say thank you very much for notifying us, and that's it. We have seen scenarios where people have left the UK, non-British people, so that they've kind of arrived in the UK, been issued with a national insurance number. They've then left the UK, haven't notified HMRC that they've left the UK, haven't notified HMRC then that they've gotten married, etc., etc. And then HMRC, when they've returned back to the UK, started a new job. HMRC effectively set up two accounts for them, which can then provide months of fun of trying to get that unwound. You might also find that if you don't tell HMRC that you are leaving the UK and you start to receive employment income outside of the UK or other sources of income outside of the UK. There's an awful lot of countries nowadays that will talk to each other. And HMRC, we are seeing probably over the past 12 months or so, a significant uplift in terms of people who are receiving what we call nudge letters from HMRC saying, we think you've got income from outside of the UK and you need to tell us about this. And I suppose there is a risk that if you don't tell HMRC that you're leaving the UK, and you then leave the UK, you start to receive employment from outside of the UK, maybe you transfer it back, especially, for example, if your family's remained in the UK and you've just left the UK for work purposes. And HMRC there's a decent possibility that you could end up with scary looking letters from HMRC saying, we don't think you've sorted out your tax affairs correctly. On the face of it, as long as you've done your research correctly, as long as you are a UK tax non-resident, none of it's irretrievable if you don't tell HMRC, but I would certainly suggest it's better to get ahead of the game and just tell HMRC that you're leaving like you're supposed to. The other thing as well, and I think possibly something that we'll be talking about at another point, but there are certain investments, for example, ISAs, pensions, etc., that are limited when you're UK tax non-resident. And if you don't notify them that you're non-resident, and if you carry on making contributions, etc., that can end up being a whole can of worms that you then need to unwind as well.
Okay. Well, thank you, Laura, for your time today, and that was a really helpful session.
No worries, Shiraz. Lovely speaking with you.
Sure. And well, that's it for today. And if you want to move to Dubai or leave the UK and become a non-tax resident, you can reach out to me or Laura. The links would be in the description below. And we'll see you in the next video.